Welcome to the annual business meeting of the Dallas County Master Gardener Association. We're glad you're all here. As you come in, please grab your lunches in the back and have a seat at the table. And we're going to start this meeting with our speaker presentation. Our speaker this morning is Laura Kimberly, and Laura is going to talk about the joy of flies. In her preface, Laura states, "Don't be fooled by mimicry and misinformation. Flies, taxonomically known as Diptera, are colorful, elusive, beguiling, aerobatic, charming, and helpful. So, you ask, there's more to flies than filth and bite." Yes, says Laura. Laura will help us find the joy of flies by taking a closer look at the qualities across the wide diversity of the Diptera with an overview of Dipteran life histories, feeding habits, beneficial behaviors, and basic fly family identification. All that so you too can advocate for flies and their important ecological roles. Laura is a member of the North Texas chapter of the Texas Master Naturalists. Flies and other insects caught her attention and earned her appreciation as she worked to rescue, propagate, plant native flowers and grasses, all as a prairie restoration volunteer. After completing the Texas A&M AgriLife Volunteer Entomology Specialist training in 2017, Laura pursued many opportunities, from podcasts to college courses, to learn more about the habits and habitats of flies as well as other insects. She is a community scientist and insect photographer who uses those skills to advocate for flies and extol the benefits of insects. So please help me in giving a warm welcome to Laura Kimberly. Thank you.
Thank you for that introduction. I am very happy to be here today. So I'm going to talk to you about the joy of flies. What's the joy in flies, you ask? Well, here's my story. Can one fly change your life? This one did. It's a scaly bee fly. The first time I saw this fly, I was like, what are you? Would you recognize this as a fly? But what? You're a bee? Fuzzy, yellow and black? No? A moth? Antenna like a moth, sort of? So what's the deal with that fuzzy tail? Oh, wait, eyes. You are a fly. Thus began an inclination to notice the flies. It brought out my curiosity. What is this insect? Can I figure it out? It gave my brain a way to stay young, studying up on who, what, why. It gave me new hobbies, insect photography and community science. This fly motivated me to be more observant as I walked and hiked. I became attentive to details and movements, beginning to notice more flies. This fly also brought me new friends, those who appreciated insects and taught me more about them, some mentors. It brought me new purpose, letting my other friends know that insects are really good and useful creatures. Before the scaly bee fly, if you asked me to name a fly, these would be the ones: housefly, deer fly, and their kin. After the scaly bee fly, I see colors: yellow, brown, red, green, even blue, and patterns like checkerboards and stripes and obliques and curlicues, and adornments, bristles and spurs, feathers and fuzz. I became attuned not only to their beauty, but also to sort them out from all the look-alike insects, and to understand all their roles, the good behavior and the bad, and the usefulness. And as Monica's introduction, I learned not to be fooled by mimicry and misinformation, by the bad reputation, by the adults you're more likely to see, by the questionable from the human perspective, but not necessarily from the fly eating habits. So come with me to take a deeper look at the beauty and important behavior of flies. There's actually a lot to like. From a practical standpoint, and certainly gardeners know this, they pollinate. They provide pest control of other insects, including other flies. They play a role in maintaining balance between species. They decompose organic matter, leaf litter, fallen trees, other vegetative matter, carrion and dung, and thus they recycle nutrients. They are food for animals up the food chain. Get a fly under a microscope or a loop or a macro lens, and from an aesthetic point of view, they are colorful, patterned, and fun to watch. So, we're going to start out with a little bit of fun with flies, a little exercise I call fly, not a fly. So there's little papers in the middle of your table, or you can just make mental notes here. We're going to do this at the beginning and at the end. So which are flies and which are not? Now some of you may know, so no collaborating. And just note whether if it's a fly or not a fly on your piece of paper or in your mind. I'll give you about a minute. Okay, so just a little fun there. And that right there is one of the joys of flies, what is and what isn't. And I heard some comment come from over here that says, well, it's hard to tell. So we'll check your answers a little later, or maybe you'll unlock a few along the way, and you'll know a little bit more how to recognize them. So if the fun of flies is recognizing them, then how do we know? What makes a fly a fly? So a little review. What is an insect? How do you recognize an insect? They have an exoskeleton. The parts of their body that provide structure are on the outside. Not like us, our structural support is on the inside. They have 3 body parts, a head, a thorax, and an abdomen. And the thorax, this middle part, right here, this middle part is where all the locomotion comes from. So they have 6 legs, 3 on each side of that thorax. And if they have wings, they would also be attached to the thorax. Most of the winged insects have 4 wings, 2 on each side, but our fly is unique among insects, just 1 pair of wings. It gives the insect order its scientific name, Diptera, di for 2, ptera for winged. And the Diptera includes critters you may not normally think of as fly, like mosquitoes and midges, but they have 2 wings, so they're in that family. And we still refer to them as flies. They're a drag on the good reputation of flies, but they're nevertheless flies. 2 wings, though, honestly, who can tell? Butterflies, easy. But if you're not familiar with a critter, whether it be a bee or a wasp or a fly, you can't always discern the number of wings. So let's focus on something else. The biggest visual giveaways are that they'll have eyes that take up a lot of their head, almost as large as their head, at least on the sides. And they generally have short antennae, but not always. You have to keep in mind that in the insect world, there are always exceptions. The only always is that there are always exceptions. So they also have these little vestiges of their evolution called halteres, and you kind of barely make out here this little clubby looking thing behind the set of wings. They provide balance and stability in flight. They evolved to lose that second pair of wings and just have these little gyroscopes that help them maneuver and fly faster. Some flies also have a cover over each haltere called a calypter. Perhaps it's to reduce wind turbulence, perhaps it's to cover their halteres, keep them from being harmed. But not all flies have calypters, so their presence is useful in identification of what type of fly it is. And fly ID is hard, so any hint you have is useful. So if you think about this, there are over 160,000 species of fly in 140 or so families. And you have a family over here, and you have a family over here, and you have a gray and black striped fly, and there's one that looks like it over here, and there's one that looks like it over there, and it's very confusing. And how many mammals are there? Well, there's 5,000 or 6,000, 29 orders. Mammal identification, easy. Birds, 10,000. The herpetologists have it easy. There's only 3,500 of them. Insects altogether, there's 5.5 million in 30 orders. So we're lucky to get a fly ID to fly. But we're going to work on some families here today. While we're talking about fly anatomy, let's talk about mouth parts. They have little sponging mouth parts, or they might have piercing, sucking mouth parts. Flies, as adults, consume liquids, and they have the mouth parts that allow them to do that. Sometimes they have to create the liquid, and they got some pretty cool ways of liquefying. We'll talk about that in a little while. So and other parts of their morphology, taxonomists use they count hairs and bristles and note their location. They trace wing veins. They dissect reproductive parts, all to get them to species. But for us everyday folks, family, subfamily, pretty good. Genus, really good. And they live in two different life phases. During their early life, they are a bit more squishy and less mobile. Larvae don't have wings. Not only do they not have wings, they have limited legs. So in this stage, they also might have different mouth parts. They might have chewing or rasping mouth parts. So they can occupy a different niche for food than the adult, either by what type of food source or the habitat of the food source. And it's mostly in the larval stage that we get decomposer and pest control benefits. So, you hear people say, oh, flies, they're eating carrion or dung. Well, it's the larva that's doing that. So this is the larva of a syrphid fly, commonly known as a flower fly or hover fly. These are the pretty little flies you'll often see in your garden. The larva of this subfamily of flower flies consumes aphids. The female lays her eggs right in the midst of the aphids, and so food is available right when those eggs hatch. Pest control in your garden. And this is the nectar-consuming adult. Watch. See that it's using its little sponging mouth part to sponge up the nectar from that flower. Dabbing the stamen, taking a nectar, maybe a bit of pollen for protein. So they are pollinators. Now, bees. Let's acknowledge that bees are efficient as pollinators, more so than the flies. In general, they visit the same flowering species on a foraging flight. And there are some notable species of specialist bees, always visiting the same flower. And they move more quickly between flowers. But many flies also pick up pollen. They have many more years of experience with pollinating. They've been around for 1 million or more years than bees. They are highly abundant. They cover more distance. And they tend to forage in wider range of weather conditions like cold and rain. And we do know of one, I don't have a photo. It's my goal in life to have a photo of this. Mm-hmm. We do know of one dipteran specialist that is a specialist, and that is the midge that pollinates chocolate, the cacao plant. A very important fly, a very important pollinator. So this little fly kissing me, it was really dabbing my sweat. And then if you notice that little action where it kind of rubbed its legs, they're very fastidious cleaners. If you watch them, you'll see them. They'll rub their legs on their mouth parts, on their antenna, on their eyes. They don't have eyelids, so they have to keep their eyes clean on their own. And they like to clean. They're inclined to do their own window wiping. The flies in the Syrphidae family, the subfamily Syrphini, are all the aphid eaters. Pest control as larvae, pollination as adults. Look at the pollen here on this middle fly. So pollinator. It's going to carry that from that flower to another. These are the oblique striped tails, also sometimes known as oblique streaked tails. One of the flies easier to get to a species ID. Two more species in that family. And you can see here why hoverflies are often mistaken for bees. But at best, they're imperfect mimics with warning colors of bees and wasps, and they're very good at confusing us humans. They don't bite. They're not capable of stinging. So when you see these little fellows in your garden, you don't need to worry about them. They may also be accused of being a wasp, right down to the little pinch in the waist. This is a four-spotted aphid fly. This is a fly that is an excellent hover fly. It's excellent at hovering. It can just hover in one place. They can fly backwards too. That's those halteres. These flies specialize on aphids on citrus. But the Syrphidae have a bit of diversity in terms of their eating habits. They're not just aphid eaters as larvae. This subfamily, the Aristolinae, live around or near sources of decaying organic matter, usually in wetter environments. They are the detrivores, decomposers, nutrient recyclers, providing ecosystem services. Another reason to be joyful for flies. Now, it's kind of mucky, yucky sometimes how they do this, and I've just kind of learned to embrace it because they're just so wonderful. This is the group of flies that, as larvae, are known as the rat tail maggots. So somebody said, you're going to talk about flies during lunch? Okay, so you... and we're going to... So I made this a smaller picture. Here is the rat tail maggot, and we won't dwell on that. But they need that appendage so that they can get to the top of the water and breathe. And they are providing an important cleanup service, so it's got to be done. So let's look at a few adults. So now we get to a really good mimic. Would you say fly if you saw this? This is the bare-eyed mimic. But if you look at the eyes, you can see they're as big as the head. It doesn't have really long antennae either, so it's a fly. The adults, like most of the Syrphinae, consume nectar, and the larvae feed on that decaying organic matter in ponds. These live in riparian areas near streams. And here's just kind of a view of the bumblebee that it mimics. Honeybee or fly, another good mimic. This is the drone fly, named for the male honeybee it seems to imitate. And here is a honeybee and a fly. You can really sort of begin to see the difference there. But they're considered good mimics because their behavior mimics the bees by the way they move back and forth, flower to flower. They're not really the hovering type. They really mimic the action of the bee. And they also benefit from those brown and yellow warning colors of the insect world. Whose abdomen is this? A wasp. Well, when you begin to see this angle, you can see it has halteres. It has short stubby antenna, and the eyes take up the full side of the face. And here is the good side view where you can see how those eyes actually mimic the face of the yellow hornet that it mimics. So the hornet, that's not all eye, but here on the fly, it is. On the hornet side also, it has spikes on its legs to catch its prey, but our vegetarian fly doesn't need those, so it's got smooth legs. Along with the eastern hornet fly, we also have the yellow jacket hoverfly. It doesn't have the nice colorful eyes. But these are both in the same Aristolinae family, and they are found in decaying trees, often in rot holes, another recycler of nutrients. And they're very good at buzzing. That's another way that they imitate the wasp. You'll hear them before you see them. They actually kind of overdo it. They buzz a little bit more than wasps sometimes. Like, I want to prove to you. But they're not all mimics. There are several with other genera that have very cool eyes. This fly is called the wavy mucksucker. Wavy eyes, and larvae are found in the muck of wet prairies and wetland environments. Another cool eye fly, the common lagoon fly. So as its name suggests, you're going to find it in marshy waters, slow-moving waters, and like the mucksucker, it's a decomposer of organic matter. Another one with a name that suggests what it does. It's one with beefy legs. You can see it has these beefy femurs. It is a common compost fly, another decomposer. Silage and manure and compost is where you'll find the larvae. Another family of the Syrphidae, this is the Microdontinae. They are an ant mimic. You say, ant mimic, Laura? Well, you're right, it doesn't look like an ant. But this green fly is a metallic ant fly. The larvae live in the nest and feed on the eggs of their host, which are ants. They fool the ants to avoid detection by mimicking ant pheromones. So now we've seen visual mimicry, we've seen olfactory mimicry, and we've seen activity mimicry. So there's a lot of different ways that insects mimic each other. And with this fly, we've wound our way back to a predator eating on the ants. And that is all the families of the Syrphidae. So we're going to move on to another predatory fly in the larval stage. This is the Midas fly. These are ground-hovering insects. She's looking for the nest of soil-dwelling insects where she will lay her eggs, and the larvae will feed on the soil-dwelling insects before pupating and becoming an adult, where they also take in nectar and pollen. Another view where you can kind of see that it is more fly-like, even if it has longish antennas, but they're not as long as a wasp. Now compare that fly to this fly. And what do you notice? You might notice spiky legs. So some people think, well, is that a wasp? It's got spiky legs. But no, it's got the eyes of a fly. This is the robber fly, a full-on predator. They eat other insects as larvae and as adults. The leg hairs and spurs are there to aid it in capture of their prey, but it also has facial hair so that it can not be injured by their flailing prey. They are really good hunters on the fly. They wait for unsuspecting prey in the dappled shade. This one on the leaf of a rattlesnake master. Lots of other insects on those flowers during the summer, and they'll just fly out and grab something to eat. It may be a large prey. This one has an eastern amberwing dragonfly. So we said they have to consume liquid the way their mouth parts operate. So they have a piercing sucking mouth part that they use to inject the saliva. They're injecting peptides into the prey, which paralyze it and then liquefies its insides, and they just sip it back out. So lunch. It may take 35 to 40 minutes to consume, depending on the size of the prey. So if it's small prey, it might take 8 to 10 minutes. If it's a large prey, it might take 30 to 45, and they just sit there. They might readjust their prey every once in a while. And when they're done, they just fly off and drop the prey. So here's one with a medium-sized prey. Might take 15 or 20 minutes. It's eating a stink bug, it's pest control in your garden. Now sometimes they do catch things we like honeybees and other native bees, but that's part of their role in keeping a balance in the ecosystem. They might take small prey. This is a very small robber fly. It's about 5 to 9 centimeters long, and its prey is a little thrip. That probably takes about 5 minutes, if that, to consume. So there's a size for every niche. The beak can also siphon nectar as well. Females need both nectar and protein for developing and laying their eggs, which they will lay in the soil or in bark or in grass sheaths. She's laying her eggs in the sheath of a dry grass stem. Larvae will hatch from those eggs, and they will drop to the ground where they will find their food source, which is other soil-dwelling insects. They also may eat roots and decaying matter. So part of the evolutionary success for the robber fly is that the hunting grounds for the adult and the larva are different in the different stages. So how do you know this is a robber fly and not a bumblebee? Bumblebees are pollinator, they take pollen back to their nest. Robber fly eats another insect. It's a carnivore. And I don't know if you can see it, but it's also got a little halter right there. So a bug in its mouth must be a predator. This is very attractive. A family of very small flies are the Dolichopodidae, commonly referred to as the long-legged flies. These are the flies that come in all kinds of beautiful colors. They also some of the males might have these flattened tarsi, which they use to better court their mate. Robber flies live in more dry areas. Dolichopodidae live in wetter areas, including a well-watered neighborhood. I find these in my neighborhood. Both the larvae and adults are predators. They're very similar to the robber flies in that the young eat soil-dwelling insects and may feed on roots and things like that. They're going to be eating a different size prey than the robber fly. They have a different way of eating. They have different mouth parts that kind of masticate their food, and then they can sip up the liquid and toss the rest. Sometimes you might see them on flowers, but mostly you'll see them on leaves, and that's how you can begin to distinguish them from the little green sweat bees. This is all the colors that they can come in. I mean, it's blue, green, they're stripes, they're bronze. They're very beautiful. But not all flies with long legs are Dolichopodidae. This fly is closely related. It's a dance fly, the Empididae. Adults are also carnivorous, feeding on other flies and insects. The females in this family of flies are not really able to hunt for themselves, so they need a nuptial gift from the male to mate. So he brings her a gift so that she has protein for her egg development. The larvae have varying eating strategies. Some of them are predatory, but most eat decaying matter, vegetative matter. Flies in the family Micropisidae, commonly known as the stilt-legged flies, imitate the behavior of other insect orders, notably ants and Ignomiid wasps. This one in particular, if you know Ignomiid wasps, they have antennae that will be white-tipped. Well, this fly has white-tipped legs. When you see them crawling around leaves and plants, they have those white-tipped legs out in front of them, just waving, 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 which is imitating those Ignomiid wasps, which are parasites of other insects. Predators are not the norm among Diptera. Parasites and parasitoids are more likely. Parasites let their host live. Parasitoids may let it leave for a while as they consume non-essential parts first, but eventually their host is going to die. So the Tachinidae, commonly known as the bristleflies, are the second largest dipteran family and the largest family of parasitic flies, and also one of the most diverse. All the tachin flies are internal parasitoids as larvae. And tachin flies look a lot like the kind of flies we always think of, a house fly, that you've got that black and gray and brown coloring. But they can also be colorful and boldly patterned. So they have this diversity of colors and shapes and patterns, but yet in one subfamily of Tachinidae, you'll see a fly that looks like one in another family. That makes the ID really hard. They also have a diversity of hosts. Larvae consume other insects. Moths and butterflies are the most common hosts, but they also are known to consume beetles and true bugs. The pattern is that they mostly consume plant-eating insects. The female lays her eggs on the host, particularly those that parasitize caterpillars, or they may also lay their eggs near a feeding host, and they'll be chomping along on the plant, and then, oh, I just ate a parasite. This is a tachin fly that they parasitize noctuid moths. An easy-to-ID genus in the Tachinidae is the featherleg flies. The larvae are parasites on Heteroptera like leaf-footed bugs, stink-footed bugs, plant bugs, so they might be the gardener's friend. Eggs are laid on the back of the host. Second instar overwinters in the body, and then they pupate and become these lovely flies with feathering on their legs. Adults of the tachinidea consume carbs, nectar from flowers, but they also go for a little sweat from humans, so another kiss from a harmless fly. But here's a fly whose kiss I may not want. This is a fly with a stiff proboscis that is pointed, but they don't use it to sting, and it probably wouldn't hurt me. It would just not tickle the same way. This is the family Bombylidae. Bombus is derived from the Greek for buzzing. The adults sip nectar. Some are good pollinators, but this one is not, because it's just going to hover with that long beak in the flower and I don't want any pollen, it says. Similar to the tachinidea, they are parasitoids, but where the tachinids prefer to hang out inside their hosts, bombylids are external parasites. Not all bee flies have that stiff mouth part. And here you can see why they're really called bee flies, because they are pretty good mimics across that family. This fly is one that is going to lay her eggs near a nest of ground nesting bees and wasps. In order to get her eggs where she wants them, she flies close to little sand or gravel, picks up a little sand and gravel to kind of stick to her eggs, so that when she flies by and bombs the nest, the eggs have a little bit more heft to get there. It's very interesting to watch. I mean, I watched this fly for a long time, just kind of scooting around and then flying off and coming back. You might see this fly, the tiger bee fly, hanging out on wooden bridges, fences, and platforms, because their larvae are parasitoids of carpenter bee larvae. And they're very friendly insects. I had one of those land on me this summer too. I was very excited. So this family has colorful flies, tiny flies. These flies here, the gerund flies, are very small, about 2 centimeters. And they, different subfamilies have different host insects or for their parasitoid activity: bees, wasps, grasshoppers, beetles, armyworms, and cutworms, so they're good pest control. Some are hyperparasites, parasites of other parasites, such as the ichneumid wasps and the tachinid flies, and some are kleptoparasites, which my scaly bee fly fits into that category. Larvae are kleptoparasites of paralyzed prey of twig-nesting solitary wasp. So not the wasp larva itself. It's after that larva's food source. So that larva's not going to survive because somebody else is going to eat its food source. These flies probably evolved to eat caterpillars, and then they evolved to eat the paralyzed caterpillars in the wasp nest, because it was already preserved, easy. Speaking of kleptoparasites, let's take a look at some freeloaders and hitchhikers. Now, don't tell the scaly bee fly, but this little fly right here on the wheel of the wheel bug might have been the first spark of my interest in flies. One of my very first nature insect photos. I didn't even realize that fly was there until I got it home and got it downloaded. And I kept telling people about it. There was this little fly on the wheel bug. You notice the wheel bug is also consuming a bee. So it's not just the flies that do this consuming of other insects, consuming of the honeybees. And I kept wondering about that fly and asking people about it, and finally I got a lead and found out that it was a freeloader fly, which is also known, which the scientific name is Mylochidae. And this particular little fly specializes on honeybee corpses, and I've also seen it hanging out on a praying mantis with a honeybee. So whenever you see that little fly, around a praying mantis or a assassin bug of any kind, now you know. 2 years ago when I saw this, I'm thinking freeloader. So we have a beetle rolling its dung, and you have these little flies hanging out with the beetle. So I'm thinking, okay, that's got to be a freeloader fly. But no, it's a lesser dun fly. Has similar behaviors to freeloader flies. I would call it a freeloader, but it's not the official freeloader. So these particular dung flies have an association not only with dung, but with dung beetles. They ride with the beetle until it deposits the dung in the nest. Then they lay their eggs, and it provides a nest for the young of the fly as well. And the fly has been able to disperse by riding on the back of the beetle. But there are actually other flies on this dung pile. Here we see a blowfly and a Sarcophagidae. The blowfly gets there pretty quickly. The Sarcophagidae, well, it's not really slow, but got there later. And I say that because Sarcophagidae are going to lay hatching larvae instead of eggs. So she can come late to the party because her larvae are going to already be ready to eat. Different techniques for survival in the insect world. This also brings us to our complicated relationship with flies. The biting flies, the deer flies and horse flies, the black flies, the mosquitoes, and others can bite us and our domesticated animals, and even worse, carry disease. The filth flies, the flesh flies, the house flies, the bottle flies can carry disease from rotting carrion and dung to our kitchens and food. So we know that not all flies are good and that there is some need for pest control. But in noting that there are good flies, it makes us think about how we need to manage that so that all the good that flies do can continue to exist. So the mosquito carries diseases through sucking blood with its piercing, sucking mouth part from one host to the next. The deer fly in the middle can cause serious pain. It's not as much of a disease carrier, but it still can carry disease. It just mostly hurts because it has a way of like cutting. It wants to draw blood that it can slurp up, and so it has a way of cutting you. And the mosquito has a way of putting an antiseptic in you so you don't know it's there until it's, really biting you. And then the problem with the houseflies is that they have to regurgitate on food in order to start liquefying it. And sometimes they come from one source that might have bacteria in it to your sandwich, and they might deposit some bad stuff. So, it's not all good and happy. In the fly world, it's complicated. But we can learn from insects on how they manage predators and pests. Targeted eradication, avoidance, and barriers, and still get the benefit of the flies. And it's a balance, a further balance, because some of those same flies can actually be very beneficial. Those flies feeding on the dead organic tissues can also help us in solving crimes. So the Calliphoridae are sort of famously known for helping with identifying time of death, because it takes the fly a certain amount of time to get to a dead body, a certain amount of time for the eggs to hatch, and the larva to go through its instars. And that's all dependent on the weather conditions, mostly the temperatures. So the crime scene investigators have these charts. Well, if it was this temperature and it took this long, and this was the stage we found the insect, we can say time of death was 11:57, convicted. But not exactly. It's more like, well, the time of death was between 10 p.m. and 3 a.m., but still helpful. And sterile grade larvae of another fly in the Calliphoridae family are used to remove necrotic tissues from human wounds. And that is actually still used in medicine today. And when we think about eradicating insects, not even all mosquitoes are bad. This is a elephant mosquito or mosquito eater. So the adults, they're loving the nectar. Honeydew, saps, fruit, nectar. larvae of this mosquito feed on other mosquitoes. Yay. So it's kind of a twist. The larvae of the mosquitoes that bite us are eating decomposing matter and bacteria. So the female needs our blood meal in order to be able to develop her eggs. But these larvae got enough protein so that she doesn't need to bite us. And also, think about eradicating things. Not all the time is something we think is a mosquito. So this is the crane fly, often mistaken for a mosquito. But they're just vegetarians as larvae and adults. More confusion about what is a fly exists because not everything that has fly in its name is a fly. Sawflies are not flies. They're in the Hymenoptera order. They have 4 wings. Mantis fly, neuropteran, related to the green lacewings, not a fly. Nor are the dragonflies, damselflies, butterflies, caddisflies, scorpionflies, and owlflies. One-word flies are not flies. So they have fly in their name because they fly, but they're not flies. But the real flies have 2 wings and 2 words. So you'll see house fly, bee fly. And not all 2-winged insects are Diptera. Who knew? I didn't know until last year. The Strepsiptera are also parasites, as are some of the flies. Their prey are Polistes wasps, and they have 2 wings, but their halteres are up front. And so all are learning that the flies are the only ones that have 2 wings. No. And these are thought to have evolved from beetles because you can kind of see the elytra of beetles kind of shrinking up to those halteres. So we've seen some confusing flies. We've seen some flies that are some things that are not flies. We've seen a lot of flies. And so let's go back to our beginning. Fly, not a fly. How many thought wasp at the beginning? Oh, smart. A few people admit. Clearly not a fly, right? Butterfly, I put that in there because of that, it's one word. Fly, not a fly. Fly. Not a fly. That's the one that is, is kind of a not very well known. The other thing about this guy is those beetle-like antennae. Fly, not a fly. Fly. Oh, that's a bee. That's one of those little green sweat bees. It's got small little eyes here, and it's got long antennae. Crane fly, not a fly. Is a fly. Is a fly. Is a fly. Crane fly. And look, my gosh, major halteres there. That's one fly where you can always see the halteres, or most of the time. No always with insects. Fly, not a fly. Fly. Not a fly. This is one of those little potter wasp. Small eyes, long antenna. But you can't see that they, all insects are fly wannabes. All insects are figuring out how to fly with just like making their wings act like just one pair. They have ways of hooking their wings together and things like that. So, and then bonus question: fly, not a fly. Fly. When I started looking at what do flies mimic, I was like, I wonder if they imitate a beetle. And sure enough, but in Southeast Asia, so this is the only non-Texas insect here today. For me, learning about flies is also a joy, so I thought I would show you a few of my resources here. The only real guidebook here is this guidebook to the flower flies of northeastern North America. It's a good book because the map shows you where they are all across North America. even though they focus on the northeastern flies. There's a little guidebook to robber flies. It has drawings. The book in the middle is the Big Fly book. It's about that thick. It's a wonderful resource. It's very well illustrated, and it has illustrations as well as the natural history of the flies, but it's not really arranged like a guidebook. And then these two books are written by an entomologist, a fly specialist, Erica McAllister. They're really about the natural history of flies, but she has a very tongue-in-cheek way of writing. I also listen to a lot of podcasts, use Bug Guide and iNaturalist. There is an beginning online fly guide, this field photo ID for flies, because keys traditionally have been, based on you have the insect in hand and you can dissect it, but this is a guide based on photos. So it's a good start for that, for those, especially people who use iNaturalist or just want to identify a fly from a photo. In conclusion, I'll just say again, don't be fooled by thinking a fly is not a fly. Don't be fooled by the pest into thinking they're all pests. Don't be fooled by only the habits of the adults. Don't be fooled by thinking flies don't have any useful purpose. So that is my fun with flies. Thank you for sharing my joy. Any questions, or Nancy? Okay, so she asked me if I took those photos, most of those with my iPhone. Most of those are with my iPhone. I've had several iPhones over the years, and I use a couple of other cameras. It looks like a lot of cameras, but some of those are borrows from my husband. It's been fun to learn. I can't tell you light and focus and all of that. Maybe I'll be able to tell you a little bit about getting shadows or how shadows work with the iPhone, but I just worked it because I just liked being able to see them. Well, thank you so much for being a captive audience on the flies. I've actually cleared the room talking about flies with my friends before, so it's fun to get to talk to people about them. Thank you so much for having me today.
So Abby's going to talk about the nominees for the upcoming ballot.
Good afternoon, everybody. As past president, per our current bylaws, it is my responsibility to develop a slate of qualified candidates for officers and directors at large for the association. DCMGA directors and alternates and members of the Nominating and Financial Review Committee. I would like to recognize our retiring directors at large for their support and leadership over their term. Here are the wonderful people on my committee, and Jan Weir and Lena Godad will be rolling off this year, so I wanted to say a warm thank you to them for all of their input. These are the slate of candidates for 24-25. Debbie Wood, Director at Large for Community Outreach. Okay, Debbie Wood. Sarah Berg, Director at Large for Awards and Recognition. Helen Julak, Nominating Committee. Don Heberlin, Nominating Committee. And Mr. Joe LeBay, Financial Review. Thank you all so much for your willingness to help the organization out. And thank you to all the wonderful Denise and Ned and Lena and Jan and Betsy C. for all that you've done for helping our organization progress. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Abby. We'd like to take a vote on the new ballot, the slate of candidates. All in favor, raise your hand, please. Any nays? No? Okay, the ayes have it. Vote passes. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to segue here over into our finances. And we are extremely fortunate to have a large amount of funds. We currently have our funds in 2 banks, We have our operating funds are in Bank of America in the checking account at $83,000. We have some savings in Bank of America also that's at $102,000. We also have a money market account at Oakwood Bank that's $238,000, which is primarily the Carolyn Bush bequest. And then we have some petty cash. So we are extremely appreciative of the funding that we have, and we would like to be good stewards of this money. So in light of that, we are going to be making some changes here. The operating budget here of $83,000, we're going to drop this to $10,000, and we're going to move the remaining money into a money market account at Bank of America, and that money will be making 4.85% interest, which is substantially higher than the next to zero interest that we're making right now. The Bank of America savings account at $102,000, we are closing that account, and we are moving all of that money into a high-yielding either CD or treasury bond over at Raymond James. And again, that will allow us to use the interest money to further the programs of the DCMGA. The Oakwood Bank money market account will be dropping some of that because we are getting close to our insurance limit of $250,000, and we will be taking a combined $200,000 out of this 102 and the 238 to form the Raymond James account that again will be making much more interest and allow us to spend some more money on our Master Gardener programs. Our current finances, we have budgeted $50,000 in revenue, $63,000 in expenses, and we had budgeted a $12,000, almost $13,000 deficit. Year to date, we are at $34,000 in revenue, $38,000 in expenses, and just under $4,000 of a deficit. Year-to-date revenue does not include most of the dues payments, which we'll get to later. Does also not include the Japanese maple sales profits. And expenses that were not budgeted as part of this 2023 budget include the Slow Gardening event, the Dig Summit, entomology, and some other events. So we are at a deficit for this year. Moving forward, because of the deficit, we would like to increase the dues to $30, and that would be if paid before December 30th, and $40 if paid after December 1st, and $40 if paid after December 1st. Looking at some history of the dues, 2021, the dues were $25 and included the background check. In 2022 and 2023, the dues were $15, and in 2024, we are asking for a vote to move it to $30,000. $30. All right. Maybe it makes the 30 sound a little bit lighter. So, I have a slide here on what this background check and application fee is, but keep in mind when voting on it that only 7 Master Gardeners will be asked to pay a background check / application fee in 2024. So that's less than 2% of our population. The application fee, this is a change that is coming down from the state level. And every 3 years when our background checks are due for renewal, we will be asked to watch a volunteer standards video, take a little test, and this video has mostly questions pertaining to the safety and liability of the organization. And then as part of that, there's a $12 fee, and that fee also includes the background check. So those procedures will be covered at the state level, and TIG has asked that we move that policy to the individual. So we will not be collecting the dues per person and then paying that out of the organization. We will handle that separately by the individual. That's why going forward, your background checks are not included anymore in the dues. So why are we asking for an increase in dues? As you saw earlier, we're running at a deficit in 2023. Our insurance costs have substantially increased. We've had a 20% inflation since 2020 when the dues were $25. and the Master Gardener state dues have increased from $2 to $5 annually, and that's a close offset of what the background checks will cost. So you might ask, how do we compare to other organizations? Ranking from highest at the top to lowest at the bottom, the Native Plant Society dues are $45 a year. The North Texas Master Naturalists are $40 a year. Collin County is asking $40 per year. Tarrant County is currently $30, but they may increase that to $30, or increase it beyond $30 next year. Our dues are currently $15, and we're asking to move them to $30 for next year. And Denton County is increasing theirs from $15 to $20 next year. And what do your dues support? We cover insurance for all the members, name badges, scholarships, recognition award pins, meeting support. This venue is amazing, but it does have a price tag. Master Gardener activity. The AV equipment, the camera that Glenn is using over here, the lapel mic, we have replenished that, and we have also bought some new equipment for Cookie Speakers Bureau, so thank you. The dues also cover outreach costs and support for outreach events. We would like to take a vote on increasing the dues, and that is an anonymous vote since it is financial. You should have received a piece of paper when you logged in if you are a member of the Dallas County Master Gardener Association. And please mark your ballot, and then on your way out today, place it in one of the ballot boxes. We would greatly appreciate that. Yes?
Discussion?
Is there any discussion? Do you want to use that so it's on the...
I would just like to say, I think this was handled poorly by the board. If you had come to us in August and given us this information and asked us to increase our dues, I think most of us would have agreed that that was a reasonable request. But telling us that we will double your dues, or more than double, because we're not paying your background check, but not explaining anything really, I don't know about other people, but it made me mad. And I wanted more information before I agreed to this. So I'd just like to remind the board that they need to explain why they're doing things and ask for our consent, as opposed to telling us what to do. So I will be voting to increase our dues, but I hope in the future this is handled a little bit better.
I usually don't say anything, but having been in a lot of volunteer groups, I know how hard a board works, and just remember, they're not paid. So the only joy and satisfaction that you get is from the reward of trying to serve and provide a volunteer opportunity that's very worthwhile to our community and our volunteers. So we're all not perfect for sure, and I would just ask everyone to show a little grace, because even when you're paid the big bucks, everything doesn't go perfectly. And when you're a volunteer, you know, the pay is the same whether it's fun to serve on a board or not. And in many boards, I will say recruiting volunteers is hard because the expectations are so high and the pay is so very, very low. So that's all I wanted to say. And, you know, in the end, things will work out perfectly. I mean, we're fortunate the association's not broke. We all have insurance, which is good. So I just want to thank our boards for hanging in there for 2-year terms. Many boards are just 1-year terms, and for the leadership they provided.
Thank you. Let me go back. So we have the Carolyn Bush bequest here, which our investment policy does not allow us to spend the principal on. So we are collecting interest on that and using that to fund the Master Gardener activities. The money markets, the combined amount there, we are expecting $12,000 in interest. next year. And that will make a huge dent in the events that we can support through the Master Gardener program. And that will also allow us to continue to earn that money going forward and support those or support that activity. Does that answer your question? Yeah. It's gained some interest since the original amount. I want to say 220. Does anybody know the amount, the exact amount? 228, thank you. So we are extremely grateful to have this amount of funding to be able to work with. Yes. Sorry, the question was how will you keep track of the background checks? The people who are due to renew their background checks will receive an email from, I believe it's Sterling is a company, and they will guide you on how to renew that online. TIG also keeps track of that, and if for some reason that email goes into your spam folder or you don't see it, you will get a reminder. Janet. So the question was,
do we have to repeat background checks if we're in several organizations? And sadly, the answer is yes.
that question has been raised to the state, and we have been given that response. We cannot share background checks. All right, I'm going to, in the interest of time, I will stick around after the meeting, and I will be more than happy to answer further questions. TIG is back there as well, so if I misspoke on you keeping track of the background checks, please let me know. And I also have more details on the finances that I'll be happy to share after the meeting. So again, please fill out your ballot if you're a member of the association. And because it is financial, it will be an anonymous vote. All right, mission drift. This is a repeat of slides that many of you saw at last month's meeting, the first couple. But I'd just like to remind you all that our bylaws state that the association shall be a nonprofit, non-discriminatory, educational, and charitable association, with the emphasis here on educational and charitable. The bylaws also state to increase the gardening knowledge of its members and the public, utilizing Extension's research-based best management practices will be one of our specific purposes. So we have somewhat drifted away from our mission of knowledge sharing, and we would like to redirect in that purpose. The website also says that Dallas County Master Gardeners provide research-based horticulture education and information to a diverse group of learners of all ages. We teach in research, education, and demonstration gardens, community service gardens, and school gardens. So going forward, we will be gradually asking our membership to focus on knowledge sharing in the projects. And this slide did not get updated, but there will be some new requirements in the next year. And we will talk about this in a series of roundtables that we will have in January and February. We're going to be asking for membership participation in how we can be creative and improve the amount of education that we're doing at the projects. And I've been asked a few times, does this mean that if my project doesn't focus on education, that the project's going to be going away? No projects are planned to be eliminated. We would just like you to think about what you can do to improve public knowledge sharing at those projects. After this meeting, you will all receive an email asking you to view a 60-minute video that was put together by Skip Richter from the Brazos County, he's Brazos County Extension Agent. This video talks about mission drift. You will receive 1 hour of continuing education credit for watching the video. And then we will be organizing a series of roundtables where the entire membership will be invited to participate. And we would like to get your opinions and feedback on how we can increase the amount of public knowledge sharing and knowledge sharing in general that we are doing at these projects. Knowledge sharing does not mean necessarily you have to stand in front of an audience and give a speech. There's many, many different forms of knowledge sharing, and we know that a lot of people are not comfortable in front of a large audience, and you don't have to be anxious about this. We'll make it work for everybody. Okay, on a lighter note, we had several entries in the state fair this year. So if you had a jelly or jam sale that won an award at the state fair, please stand. Thank you. And moving on to our certificates of appreciation. The first two go to Alan Rister and to Janet K. Smith. Are Alan and Janet here today? Come on up. So Alan and Janet are the founding members of the Texas Discovery Garden Master Gardener's Garden. Alan is a class of 2005. Janet is a class of 2008 and the class captain. The two of them took a nice sunny patch of open land at Texas Discovery Garden and turned it into a demonstration garden, a place to demonstrate attractive landscapes using native and adaptive plants. The garden displays TDG's mission of promoting organic and sustainable gardening in an urban setting. Together, Alan and Janet have acquired thousands of hours, mostly at TDG, but also in several other areas, including the website, the advisory committee, 4-H, advanced master gardener programs, short-term consultations, master gardener school, athletes for change, Salvation Army, DCMGA board, garden tour, Ross Haven Elementary, and speakers bureau. That's quite a career in the Master Gardener Association. The next certificate of appreciation, and here's Janet's, goes to Margaret Reninsky. Margaret, can you stand, please? Thank you. Margaret does not have the word no in her vocabulary. So Margaret is the person who quietly gets things done behind the scenes. She's a member of the class of 2022, one of the interns of the year. Margaret's volunteer service is extensive and includes being her class photographer, working at Juliet Fowler, working at Lakewood Elementary, and at RB1. Margaret is also part of the 2024 garden team. And in addition to that, Margaret was instrumental in setting up the procurement process, which many of the projects have already been associated with. And she has developed accounts with several businesses to streamline the purchasing process while saving us money. Thank you, Margaret. And the final certificate of appreciation goes to Janet Lane. Janet. So when I first got up here, nervous as heck in January, and I talked about some of the changes I wanted to see throughout the year. One of them was improving volunteer engagement, and the other one was getting more volunteers out to the projects that were starving for help. Well, Janet called me right after that meeting, and she said, how can I help? And Janet has taken that back of the napkin idea of the taste of the garden and just ran with it. Janet is full of energy and ideas to expose our members to the Dallas County Master Gardener Association's projects. She has fully owned and developed every detail of the taste of the gardens, from identifying the projects, working with Neil on the sign-up genius, working with the communications team to promote the events, working with the project leaders to set the agenda, and she followed up by providing some delicious homemade breakfasts at each of these Taste of the Garden events. And she has also provided the project leaders with the contact information of the volunteers for additional manpower at these projects. So through Janet's guidance, we hope that many of the Master Gardeners have enjoyed their exposure to new and exciting projects and that you will continue to support them. Thank you, Janet. This next one is a big deal. Barbara Barbie, are you here? No, sadly she's not here, but Barbara has been awarded the President's Volunteer Service Award, and this is in recognition for volunteering over 4,000 hours of service to the Dallas County Master Gardener Association. The award is signed by Joe Biden. In addition to the letter, she also receives the presidential pin. So Barbara is a class of 2008. She's been a Master Gardener for 15 years. She's been an advocate for the Oak Cliff Parks for 21 years. She's a founding member of the Friends of Oak Cliff Parks. She served on the Dallas Parks and Recreation Board from 2013 to 2021 as the District 1 representative, where she advocated for bond money for improvements to the parks. She has been involved with the Oak Cliff Conservation League and Oak Cliff Earth Day. Barbara is responsible for getting an historic marker approved by the Keys Memorial. Barbara is responsible for getting a historic marker approved for the Keys Memorial Garden to showcase its significance. So Barbara, we thank you. Hopefully you'll see this on tape. Thank you. All right, the green team for September. If your name is called, please stand. Tig Thompson, Janet Beth Edson, Patty Brewer, Marty Slocum, Denise Struber, Sally Braden, Patty Mason, Mike Sanning, Patsy Wheeler, and Barbara Barbie. So thank you. The DCMGA 2024 Garden Tour will be held on May 18th. The garden team is led by Elaine Webster, and her team members are Christy Lawrence, Margaret Werninsky, and Chris Geyer. If you could please stand so we can recognize you. Thank you. That's an enormous amount of work that goes into planning that. We greatly appreciate you. So as noted here, to make it on the video, the date for the RB1 Urban County Taste of the Garden is postponed to the following Saturday. The other event I'd like to announce is the Garden Muse event with Janet Smith at the Bathhouse on Thursday, November 2nd from 7 to 9. So Janet will be talking about magnificent monarchs. This will be in the auditorium of the Bathhouse. And following that, there will be an art activity where we'll be making little altars from Altoid boxes. So bring your grandkids, your kids. It'll be a fun event.
Hello, everybody. So every October is Breast Cancer Awareness Month, an opportunity to spread information about the disease that will affect 1 in 8 women during their lifetimes. Thankfully, enormous progress in early detection and improved therapies has saved countless lives and extended many others, including many of us here today, myself included. To celebrate the progress that has been made and remind us about the importance of regular screening, many organizations find creative ways to increase awareness. 2 very dear friends, Zandra Ferris and Roseanne Ferguson, offered to teach and work with me and my husband to propagate a few plants that just happen to have pink blooms. So they're going to be, as she's fixing that up, there are going to be 3 different kinds of plants that you can choose from. The first one is zinnias. The variety is actually pink senorita, which I thought was kind of an appropriate name. And so zinnias, you can amend the soil with compost, keep the soil moist until they're established. They are very drought tolerant. We had some at Lakewood that went the whole summer with virtually no attention and are just glorious. We do recommend mulching 2 to 3 inches, and deadheading promotes future blooms. The second one is bouncing bet, or soapwort. It's an upright perennial, gets 2 to 3 feet tall. Full sun to part shade is the preference. They're very drought tolerant as well. You prune them to the ground in winter. And the last one is pink Turk's cap. So those can grow up to 10 feet tall in the right environment, so don't plant too many together. They like partial shade, dapple sun. They actually don't like Texas blazing sun, so that might not be a preference. Dies back in the winter and attracts pollinators. So these plants were propagated a couple of months ago by Mark and Cynthia Jones and Zandra Ferris under the tutelage of Roseanne Ferguson. And we have a nice pink table outside, so when you leave, we would love to share a plant with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Cynthia. What a lovely treat. Thank you. So that concludes our meeting. Please place your dues voting paper in the ballot box on your way out. And thank you for your support. Have a great day.